All right, we're recording now. Okay, so welcome back to another episode of the Puget Systems podcast, where we take a look at what's going on in the industry, whether that's hardware or software. So today we're looking at the video editing workflow. That's a pretty complex process to begin with, a lot of steps, a lot of people, a lot of different tools, and a lot of need to collaborate. And that's especially changed, I think, now in a time with lockdowns and social distancing. So how do you collaborate while distancing? So I have Emery Wells on with me today from Frame.io. Emery, do you mind just giving a quick introduction of yourself and your company?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Emery Wells, co-founder and CEO of Frame.io. We're a video review and collaboration product. We launched about 5 years ago. We actually just had our fifth birthday party on March 31st. We had launched just shortly before NAB 5 years ago. And prior to that, I had a post-production company. So I've been doing post-production for 15 to 17 years prior to starting Frame.io. We really just built it to solve our own problems that we were having working with our clients, with our vendors, internally with one another.
Okay. And so who's your most common customer today?
Well, when we launched, we thought it was really important. I had a boutique post-production company. So we built a product and we wanted that product to be available to companies like my own, prior boutique post-production company. And so from the very beginning, Frame.io has been a very accessible product. It's available to a lot of individuals and small teams. And the vast majority of our user base, just by pure numbers, are a lot of those types of people. But over the past couple of years, we've really been developing the product for larger media organizations. So now we have major studios, major broadcasters. We built out a really robust security program. We have a lot of major advertising agencies. So the product is still priced very accessibly to folks that are doing work either on their own or with a kind of a small group, a small team. But it also scales all the way up into a major broadcaster, major studio.
I see. And do you find that the needs and like the workflow is actually the same regardless of the size of the organization?
The core of the product is the same. So regardless of whether you're making a Hollywood feature film or you're making an instructional cooking video, the core set of collaboration challenges are exactly the same. You need sort of a home base for your project where you can upload all the files that you're working on and you can invite all the people that you're working with. You can exchange that media. You can review the work in progress. You can manage the versions. You can have, good communication about work in progress. So all of those fundamentals remain the same. As you scale, there's certainly a lot of different features that are necessary for larger organizations. And so we've invested in, as I said, a lot of security features. So we're MPAA and TPN certified. I guess really it's not MPAA anymore. It's now TPN, which is the governing body that controls, kind of the governing body for security in the Hollywood and media industry. So we've invested a lot in those systems. We've invested a lot in, being able to do things like large scale account and user management. But the core stuff is really the same. The core features are the same.
So do you feel like the position that you're in, do you consider your skill set more about people or more about software development? You know what I mean? Like what's more challenging?
Sure. Yeah. So for some context, I had a previous company. It was a post-production company. It was small. We had 5-ish full-time employees and we'd have 5 freelancers. So there's kind of like 10 people in the office at any given time. Today, Frame.io is just over 140 people as of the time of this recording. It's growing really, really fast. So I've had to learn, I had never done large-scale software development prior to starting Frame.io. I had done small-scale software development, and I had never done large-scale people management. So both were new things that I've had to learn how to do. I would say that my natural skill is more in product direction and software development, more so than people management and sort of scaling systems. But I've had to learn a lot about that. So yes, I'm certainly a product and vision driven founder, less so an operational or people management driven founder. And, but like I said, I've had to really level up on that side of the house.
Yeah, sure. I'd imagine, like I'm thinking back to, okay, small organizations versus large, and something that we found as we provide workstations is the larger enterprises tend to have more like already kind of figured out. Like they know what they need. They know what they need. They know what they want. Now they're just like, they can go out and they can find the tools to get the job done. Whereas with smaller organizations, it's a little bit more like they're still figuring it out. They might have been like an individual before, and that's like a whole like way of doing things. And now as they're a small team, like there's new challenges they've never even had before, and they're having to like solve these things in real time. What do you find that people tend to do when they don't have Frame to help with that? How are people collaborating before?
Yeah, so our product is really kind of a new category. There wasn't sort of like a large company that was already providing this type of service or product. It was really most creatives and media companies were really just sort of using a variety of different tools to kind of get the job done. They were typically using something for high-speed file transfer, the common ones like Box and Dropbox, or sort of the kind of higher end tier like Aspera or Signiant. They were using something for work in progress review. Surprisingly, when we started Frame.io, now it's been 5 years, the market's changed a little bit, but 5 years ago, a lot of people were just using Vimeo or even unlisted YouTube videos because why? Because they had a good playback experience. Actually, at the time, a lot of the other, really Vimeo and YouTube were like kind of the only mainstream services that had a really good online video playback experience. And so people were using those just for work in progress. They were emailing links back and forth. It wasn't uncommon on any given job. So I came from the advertising world where we were doing sort of like, broadcast advertising. And with all the kind of post-production companies and advertising agencies I was working with, it wasn't uncommon on any given job that we would have 4, 5, 6, 7 different services in the mix, because people were just sort of using, kind of a hodgepodge of things to sort of get the job done. I might send somebody, I might send a freelancer I hired a file on Dropbox because they needed the high-res original. And then they send back, something to me on WeTransfer, and then a preview on Vimeo. And then I've sent out, the links for my client on something else. So it was sort of all over the place. We didn't have a central place to sort of manage this really essential process.
Yeah. We see the same thing. It's amazing how many places are kind of duct taped together. It works, but it's not very purposeful, or there's not a very elegant solution to it. So that's cool. So what has changed now? So everyone's talking about the coronavirus and lockdown and social distancing, and obviously with a cloud-based online collaboration tool, there's a lot of opportunity there. How has that changed? Maybe like even your most common customer?
So we've done a fantastic series to really explore this in depth. It's called Workflow from Home, which is hosted by our SVP of Innovation, Michael Cioni. And we actually talked to a lot of customers that have adapted their workflows. And there's people that fall into different camps. Some people were already using Frame.io, and it was actually very easy for them to adapt their workflow, or teams that were kind of already working in a distributed fashion. I think that the companies that are having the harder time transitioning are kind of really the bigger companies that really have not been working in a very distributed fashion, and they were very sort of tied to the sort of in-person synchronous way of working with one another, where you review an edit session, you review a color session. The world over the past really kind of 5 years has already been becoming more distributed. And granted, there are challenges, but I guess the answer to your question is it's really all over the map. I think the larger companies are having a harder time because it's harder to change when you have a big operation going that's dependent on in-person workflows. It's much harder to adapt that very quickly.
Yeah. Do you find that smaller or larger organizations tend to have a bigger appetite for a tool like this? You know what I mean? Is a larger organization have a harder time like getting people on board?
Yeah. So the answer in the world of coronavirus. So certainly this is kind of forced everyone to think about how they work and to figure out how to work in a distributed fashion. So that's definitely driven a lot of urgency from every type of company in the world, big and small, to figure this out. And amongst a very kind of challenging situation and time, we feel fortunate that we've kind of built a product that can actually help solve some of these problems and enable these companies to continue working. So there's been tons of urgency that's been driven. I mean, kind of pre-coronavirus era, there's already been a movement to adopt more of these kind of cloud-enabled tools, and certainly we've had a great deal of success selling into larger media organizations, advertising agencies, studios. new media companies like the BuzzFeeds of the world, the Vices of the world. Those are big customers of ours. So short answer is the appetite's there. This has really driven that forward. And I think it's really it's not, like people are talking about how coronavirus and social distancing is going to have a long lasting impact on many different industries. And I think our industry is no different. I felt that I gave a presentation just a couple weeks before the coronavirus started at the HPA retreat in Palm Springs. And our position for that presentation was that the post-production industry and the video industry is on the precipice of really kind of adopting a new era of cloud-enabled workflow. And there's going to be a very distinct kind of pre-cloud and post-cloud era in the way that we think about, sort of a pre-digital and post-digital era, or even sort of like a file-based and, kind of a pre-file-based era. There's been a number of distinct moments that really fundamentally change the way that post-production works and video gets made. And the cloud is the next major sort of step function change. And we've been sitting right on that precipice, and this is just kind of thrusting it forward.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What do you think about actually, the actual, beyond the collaboration and the file hosting and that type of stuff, the actual work being done in the cloud? I mean, there's been a shift in that direction too over the years. Do you think we're getting close on that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of activity in that space. So, you have, you have sort of fully cloud solutions that are, if you're familiar with like Teradici and sort of what companies like that are doing, or Bebop technology, where they're saying, all right, well, we're going to take the software that you've already used, that you use Premiere, you use Media Composer, whatever you use, and we're going to just install that software on a server in AWS or Azure or wherever. And then you're basically just going to do a screen share. It's more sophisticated than that, but essentially you're doing a screen share where everything is running in the cloud. 100% is in the cloud. Your media is in the cloud. The application is in the cloud. And what that really depends on is a super low latency connection, and it works surprisingly well. I mean, if you've used these solutions, I think it's surprising how well they work. It does require a lot of setup. It does require investing in getting your source media into the cloud. There's a lot of challenges related to that. And then there's a number of sort of hybrid sort of workflows that leverage pieces of the cloud, that leverage kind of standard workflows that people are doing today. And that's where Frame.io sits. We're more of, hey, you can leverage parts of what the cloud is really good for, but we're not, people are still using Premiere on their desktop, they're still using Final Cut, they're still using Media Composer, Nuke, After Effects, all of those things. But Frame.io kind of sits in that sort of cloud, as that cloud intermediary, that cloud hub, where you can exchange media, exchange communication. But you think about what's going to happen over the next few years. I think there's going to be a lot of developments in, actually enabling the creation process, more of the creation process itself, to happen in a cloud-based solution.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely starting to see a shift in that direction, even just with the whole remote working from home thing. Because, we have a lot of our workstations out in business locations, also home locations. But now people are kind of stuck on the other side of, they're not where their workstation is anymore. If their workstation is at work, now they're at home, and so they're remoting in, and so we're fielding a lot of questions about work like that. And that's kind of it's a big grand experiment to like, well, what would it be like actually to do this editing where you're not in the same room as your workstation? And it opens up definitely a lot of minds to workflows that weren't previously considered, but now they're forced. And so it's a really interesting time, a lot of change. I guess, speaking as a hardware provider, as somebody who builds these workstations, if you were talking to me or talking to somebody at Dell or HP, what is something that we can do to help your mission, to help your users?
Help our users. It's interesting. I mean, our product is not really so dependent on hardware. I've done a lot of post-production, so I've been dependent on a lot of hardware. It's totally essential. I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I think that as for hardware vendors, well,
I mean, do you find like it's the same, almost like duct tape together solution, that there isn't like a cohesive, everyone has rolling their own plan, just kind of figuring it out. or is there a little bit more intentionality than you've seen on the software side of things?
Sorry, are you saying are people sort of just like from the hardware side? Are people
Is it
kind of just
wild?
rolling their own?
Well, like, is it Wild West? Is in your experience, do you find that there's more consistency around the hardware that people are using, or is it very like hit or miss? What these big firms are using, what the small companies are using? Um,
I think there's been a good amount of convergence. I don't think it's super wild west. I mean, I think you have, obviously Apple-based hardware for companies that continue to be Apple-based, and the new Mac Pro, and then I think HP has really risen as a dominant player. To be quite honest, this hardware space is not. I haven't been as close to the hardware side as I have been in the past, but it seems like HP is really the dominant player on the PC side. I know that Dell's also been playing a bigger role, but HP seems to be dominant. And I think that, like from a graphics card perspective, there's still, I don't know that it's not hodgepodge. It's just not ideal, right? Like you can't have the graphics cards you want on the Apple platform. The biggest complaint on the hardware side is probably that you can't have Nvidia cards on a Mac, right? But other than that, I think that, from a hardware perspective, sort of like there's also some challenges, I think, with software vendors that are making creative software to figure out, what hardware they need to support. You have Metal and OpenGL and OpenCL and, other sort of technologies from Microsoft. And, Apple is depreciating, Apple's going to be all Metal moving forward over the next few years. So yeah, I think there's some challenges there for software companies that are making creative software that depend on, getting the highest performance possible and doing a lot of intense kind of graphics compute.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, from my perspective,
I was going to say also that, something that I feel I've been out of hardcore post-production now for about 5 years because I did it, I did it for a long time. And the thing that I'm jealous of that's just made so much progress. There's actually two things that I'm really jealous of that have made tremendous progress in the hardware space that was always so expensive and such a pain. Storage, storage has just got, like what you can do with USB based storage now is absolutely insane. And monitors, monitors, like color critical monitors, that was wild west, several years ago. It was a really challenging time where there wasn't really, industry standard kind of color accurate reference displays, but there's been so much progress on monitors and in storage, I think, over the past 5 years.
Something that I've observed from the hardware side is as it seems like the pace of change is accelerating. We have like AMD and Intel competing with each other better than they have in the past, and so there's all these options now. And to your point, like even on like Metal versus CUDA versus what framework the developers code for, it's the same with hardware as they go after like hardware optimizations. It used to be easier because it was just like, well, there's Intel and you just optimize for Intel. And now with AMD being more competitive, it's more challenging for even the ISVs, for like the Adobes and DaVinci, to make sure they are optimized for just like the breadth of everything that's out there.
Yeah, and I think if you're really having a very forward-looking, a very kind of forward-looking strategy around kind of adoption of cloud, now you're also considering how your software strategy fits into not just sort of cross-platform desktop, Mac, PC, CUDA, Metal, Intel, AMD, but then you're also thinking about how that plays in a distributed web architecture and a cloud stack, and that's going to be Linux world predominantly. Obviously you can run Windows servers, but yeah, it's a matrix of technologies and choices, and it gets much hairier when you try to include web-based technologies, because that is unfortunately still the wild west. I mean, it's gotten better, but there's a lot of wild in the web world.
Well, yeah, and even in the cloud, there's still not a lot of like homogeneous hardware out there. Every cloud data center is running different versions of hardware, and especially with
you wind up building for a specific cloud as well. So that's you can take strategies where you're not dependent on one particular provider, AWS, Azure, but there's so many phenomenal services. As you want to tie into these services, you wind up getting locked into their services as well.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, so you mentioned, being out of doing, the hardcore post-production yourself for a few years. How do you stay up to speed on, the ever-evolving workflow and the needs and pains of creators?
It's a good question. So, I mean, I think that having done it for so long, lived in this, I was in the seat, I was an editor, I did motion graphics, I did visual effects, I did color grading. I mean, I've 10,000 hours many times over, and that doesn't sort of dissipate super quickly. I mean, the market
Right.
and the world does change, but I spent an entire career, truly living and breathing it, just doing the work every single day. And so I still hold on to a lot of that knowledge, but, as a company, it's probably a more interesting question of how do we do it as a company? Because, for me personally, my job now, my role is to be CEO of this 140 person company. And I have a lot of new skills and things that I have to get good at. And sort of being an expert in post-production tends to actually come a little bit further down in my list of responsibilities of things I need to be really good at. So
Mhm.
organizationally, what we've done, which I think is something kind of interesting, is the typical structure of a software team is if you think about kind of the predominant skill sets that come together to create software, you have you have engineering, which is clear. You have design, product design, which is clear, and you have product management. And product management is probably the most amorphous of the roles. Product management can take different forms at different companies, but essentially product management is the designer of the outcome. They're sort of driving what the product should be, how it should work, and then working with the designers and the engineers to sort of bring that to life.
Mhm.
But if you're trying to build world-class software in the SaaS world, which is where we're in, software as a service, you want to recruit from the very best software companies in the world, and the product managers that come from those companies that know what it means to build high quality, scalable software that solves business and customer needs. We're typically recruiting people that have no background in video whatsoever. And so what we've done is, and if you want to go out and hire a bunch of post-production experts, the best post-production experts don't have the skill set of having built software at the best software companies in the world.
Mhm.
So we have kind of a pairing that we do with our product manager, and we pair our product manager with a role that we call a workflow expert. And the
Mhm.
workflow expert's a post-production person. So in addition to, of course, when you're building software, you go out, you talk to customers. Okay, what are your needs? You map out their workflows. You try to tie that back to the software that we're designing. But there's a lot of room for interpretation as you go and talk to customers. And so that workflow expert is sort of the post-production expert that's internal to the team all the time, that is helping to translate and craft and shape the needs of real post-production professionals. And that pairing has been successful. And it might sound like a small thing, but it actually took us a really long time to really figure out that structure and figure out how to make it work. Because, for anyone that's worked in an organization, it's organizational structures and people, it's all very
Yeah.
complex. The way that people are, their roles, how they're incentivized, all those things are complex. So kind of getting that to work really, really well, I think has been actually something really fundamental. It's the combination of like best-in-class product managers with best-in-class post-production experts and getting that to work. And so that's been really good.
And those workflow experts, are they on your staff, or are they contracted from the outside?
No, so we don't have any contractors. They're all full-time. And it's kind of a
Oh,
cool
okay.
opportunity. I think a lot of post-production people are excited for the opportunity to work at a software company. Software companies, it's an industry that does very well. And so there's a lot of perks and things like that. Whereas, the media industry and post-production industry, it's my first passion. It's a passion industry. And with a passion industry, it comes with a lot of, sometimes challenges. Sometimes the pay isn't always fantastic, or, the hours can be pretty intense, and the benefits are not always so great. So it's been cool to be able to kind of recruit some people from post-production. And I think they've been, excited to work at a software company.
Oh, that's cool. We take a little bit of a different tact. It's kind of similar, actually. So, I mean, we have to have people on our staff that understand the needs of creators as well. And, but our people that we have all on staff, it's in our labs team, are still very like hardware centric. Like that's their background, that's their core. And so we need constant touch points out to the outside to like make sure that we don't lose touch with reality, because we'll just
Yeah.
go in our little hardware circle. And so we have a whole set of, you'd even call them like an advisory panel, like people that we work with, reach out to, that basically, we help them with their work, but in return, they feedback, what their needs are, what their pain points are, how, how the world works in the content creation industry. And we view it as a big win when on our labs team, if they start identifying more with the content creators than with the hardware team. If they start using like verbiage where they, if they say we is actually referring to the content creation community.
Yeah.
It's a cool thing to see when, you have people that are so passionate about helping people that they kind of identify more with that group.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I used a lot of post-production software, obviously, for many years, hardware, software, and I've definitely been the user whom it's so clear and obvious to me what a company should do, and
Mm-hmm.
I could sort of like walk in and say, I could set your strategy for you. I can tell you what features you should build, and clearly there's a disconnect. We've all used products that were, clearly sort of built by engineers, right? And engineers are not always close to the user problem. But it's actually such a difficult thing. I would say there was some, I was a bit naive in thinking that like, well, as a user, because I spent all day, every day just using the software, whether it's Adobe or Apple or whomever, right? Or hardware. You used to spend all day, every day using that software or hardware. And that is not a thing that anyone at my company can do, right? Because then we'd be paying them to be a post-production person.
Right.
And so
Right.
the ability to deeply connect with customers, deeply understand their problems, and connect it authentically to what we're building is probably the hardest challenge in software for any software company.
Mm-hmm. The parallels are awesome because we see the same thing as we aggregate feedback into like Intel, AMD, Nvidia. It's the same type of thing. It's easy for us to come in and say like, guys, okay, just do it this way. This is what you need to focus on. But it's, we have the benefit of like, we live and breathe that world of where the rubber meets the road, and they don't have that benefit. We would never be able to design a processor from scratch because that's where they spend their time.
And the challenging thing is that, as somebody who you may have deep insight into your customers, and you're CEO of your company, I'm CEO of my company, you actually can't tell somebody what to do. Like that doesn't motivate anyone to say, well, this is what customers do, so build it this way. In many ways, maybe life would be easier if you could just do that. But, no one wants to work that way. And so it's all about creating the systems that allow, your team to sort of be able to come up with those conclusions on their own.
Right.
Even if you have the answer, you can't do it. It's just not scalable. It's not motivating.
Yeah. No, totally get it. Yeah. It's really just, about immersion and, let them talk to the end users and talk to the people that are experiencing the pains and come to the conclusions. I totally agree.
Yep.
So, okay. So, here we are around NAB time, but we're not at NAB. I presume you would have been there.
We would have been there. This would have been our second year having a big booth. We did a big booth last year, our first time having a booth last year. And it would have been our second. Yeah. We've been at NAB every year, kind of in partner booths and things like that. But then last year we did our first solo booth, and then this year would have been that as well.
Okay. What would you have been talking about there?
Well, because NAB didn't happen, we felt that, we no longer sort of have the specific dates where we had to kind of get our release out. We had an NAB release that was ready. We decided to sort of give ourselves a little bit more time to sort of finish up some things. So we're not quite ready to talk about what we would have been talking about at NAB last year.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll stay tuned then.
Or sorry, at NAB this year, had we gone to NAB. I mean, there were a couple things I can talk about, some initiatives that we have been public about that I think are quite interesting. So one of the initiatives we've been very public about is our initiative of camera to cloud. And so we hired Michael Cioni, who a lot of people know in the industry, one of the sort of visionaries in the industry. He was the founder of two very successful post-production companies, the most recent of which was Light Iron, that was acquired by Panavision. And Michael joined Frame.io several months ago as our SVP of Innovation, global SVP of Innovation. And one of the first innovation projects that Michael is spearheading is something that we call Camera to Cloud. And that is, pretty much what it sounds like, which is to capture directly from camera into Frame.io. And we've been showing prototypes of our approach. We recently showed a prototype of it at the HPA event in Palm Springs. And we were going to show more about kind of the progress that we've made with that. But it's it sounds simple. It's actually really hard to make it work in on a production and with all the sort of stresses and things that have to go right in a production.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty transformative. I mean, if you think of the idea is that the moment you hit stop on camera, your footage is available everywhere it needs to be available. Well, that's a pretty cool value proposition.
Yeah, awesome. And then I presume the plugins in, say like Premiere, Resolve, then immediately that footage becomes available in those tools.
Yeah, so we've already, we already built integrations with Premiere, After Effects, Resolve, Final Cut, and we have a kind of a lighter weight integration with Avid Media Composer. So yeah, like any media that's in Frame.io today is also available in those NLEs. Nice,
that's pretty cool. Okay, well, anything else that you're hoping to talk about here?
No, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate you being on too. This was really interesting to me. It's cool to talk to somebody who's so close to. Boy, it really feels like you're on the forefront of these online tools, challenges that a lot of these different companies or organizations are having. I don't know. It must be fun to be able to help people with really just a frustrating problem that we all have.
Yeah, it is. And it feels, as I said earlier, it feels especially fortunate that, we actually have a product that's helping people stay in business right now. So, we did a couple promotions, or not promotions, really just kind of like, we're just trying to help. So when this all happened, we were like, okay, well, we're in a position to help. What can we do to help? And so we offered a free 2 terabyte boost to all of our existing customers, because we assumed that, hey, a lot of people are going to be depending on doing more cloud file transfer and working from home. So we did a free 2 terabyte boost to everybody. And then we offered free accounts for anyone that was doing, education, trying to figure out how to keep education operations running remotely or from home. Any kind of nonprofits or people that were doing work to, try to help what's going on. So, we have a product that can help. We want to be helpful, and it feels good to be in a position to do that.
Yeah, awesome. And I presume the best place where people can go to find out more is frame.io.
That's right, frame.io. It's great to have. The name of our company is also our domain.
Yeah, it's easy to remember. Okay, all right. Well, thank you again for your time. This has been awesome. Very, very informative.
Thank you very much.